Hello and welcome to the Everyday Joy podcast. I'm your host, Joy Ravella. Today's conversation is all about our thought life, with specific reference to the thoughts we have around our body and self-image. Let's get into today's verse.
Be careful how you think. Your life is shaped by your thoughts. Proverbs 4:23 GNT.
Before we dive into today's conversation, I would love for you to go ahead and hit like, subscribe, or follow, because it does really spread the word. Now, if you've already done that, thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast community and listening in. It really means a lot. Now, let's get into today's conversation. Got the amazing Jackie here in studio with me. Jackie, we've had the best conversations over the last 3 days. We've talked about your own testimony. We've talked about generosity. We've talked about the single journey and waiting for God. And a lot of those previous conversations we've had, and you can listen again to them on the Everyday Joy podcast. Just go back and scroll up a little bit. But at every single point, we kind of referenced this particular verse because all three of these tie in with your thought life and what goes on between our two ears. What are your first thoughts, first impressions of this verse, Jack?
I love this translation. There are a lot of different ways of saying this. You know, another translation says, more than anything you guard, protect your mind, for life flows from it. There's another verse that talks about, our thoughts being the fountain of our heart. And I think it's great. It's a warning. It's a caution. It's a moment of reflection.
What do you think this verse tells you about who God is or what matters to him?
I actually think it tells us that God is actually a really loving father, loving parent towards us. And even though we might not understand, he tries to guide us and tell us what's good for us. It tells me that he's concerned with and cares about me, and he cares about how I live my life.
Yeah, I think for me as well, it's when I stop and think about it, God cares about what I think about. My first response is, yikes.
So true. and then starts the rabbit hole, right?
Yeah. But also, I guess for me, I need to choose to believe that what a powerful act of love, right? That God loves me and cares about me so much that even every thought is precious and matters to him. I think we've all got experiences about the power of our thoughts and where a certain train of thought can take us. What are your thoughts, Jack, on on this verse and how it's played out in your life?
Yep. When I was a lot younger, sort of BK, before kids. BK. Before kids. I thought that a lot of the people's acceptance of me and my value was in how I looked and how I was presented. So, I was a very different shape before I had kids and when I was younger. I was tall, had blonde hair, I was really thin, verging on underweight. I never worried about my weight. If I felt clothes getting a bit tighter, I just didn't eat the caramel slice next week. It was that simple. Yeah. And you receive validation for that. Yeah. Not just from individuals, but from society as a whole, from what you see on a billboard, in a magazine, that, if you look a certain way and you present yourself a certain way, then you're highly valued.
Right.
And I took a lot of that to heart. When I was pregnant, the only thing that stopped nausea for me was eating.
Right.
So if I had something in my stomach, I didn't feel as nauseous. And of course that leads to a little bit of, developing the baby. Like we had, COVID weight, you get baby weight, etc., etc. And I didn't even realize it was a conscious thought. I think it took me nearly 20 years to realize that actually my value doesn't lie in how I look. My value doesn't lie in my weight. My value doesn't lie in whether I'm wearing a tracksuit or not. Yes, I can, like we've come in today And, I put a little bit of makeup on, I put on my, one of my favorite tops, and, I feel good for doing that. But it wasn't because I thought that I would be valued more for that. And it took a long time to get there. And my thought life definitely was, I'm not as valuable. And that affected what we talked about the other day in terms of being single and seeing that as an opportunity for me. I thought nobody would value me because I was a bit heavier than what I was when I was younger. That thought, that unconscious acceptance of that way of thinking affected 20 years of my life of yo-yo dieting, doing ridiculous things to try and lose weight.
Yeah. So when was that moment where you were like, this is enough? Was it a defined moment that you can remember when you were just like, actually, I'm sick of the yo-yo dieting. I'm sick of the roller coaster this thought takes me on every time? Or was it more of a gradual process?
I'd say it was a quick, gradual process.
Okay,
so it wasn't overnight, but it was over the period of about a couple of months. I'd been like adhering to a very strict, restrictive diet for a while. I'd always known in the back of my head that it was about a mindset. It wasn't just about what I was eating or doing. And I think this is probably one of those rare examples where you can say social media worked for good. I actually started thinking about it, and I started thinking, this is, I just had that little seed in my brain, which I guess is like a thought.
Yeah.
A thought seed that was telling me, you know what, this isn't a great way to live. Found that a really positive experience and ended up thinking, well, what am I doing? By that point, my kids are older, so I'm like, what example have I set for them? And it's, not something I can change at that point, but I can start very consciously saying, actually, I'm not engaging in that anymore because what I realize is that I still hold value. And I, went to see a nutritionist and said, if you need to weigh me, that's fine. I don't want to hop on scales. I don't want to know what I weigh.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have no idea. I haven't weighed myself for over 2 years. So,
wow.
Yeah. But it's that power of your thoughts, right? Yeah.
So 2 years on now from the decision you made to basically just kick that thought out your brain, which says your value is in how you look or how you present yourself. How has it changed the way you live? How has that changed the way you do relationships and just life on the everyday?
I don't feel guilty if I hoe into a bit of cake, like, at work or in front of other people. If I'm out in a restaurant, I don't have to think about, well, does this have this in it or does this have this in it? No, I feel like eating a steak with chips. I'll have a steak with chips.
Yeah. Sounds like you just feel freer.
Absolutely. That would be a good way to put it. Yep.
Yeah, freedom.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this verse really, it doesn't say it, but maybe that's what it's trying to get us to ultimately. I think there's that verse that says it is for freedom that Christ came to earth.
Absolutely.
For freedom, right? And if our thoughts have so much power and they can shape our lives, well, our thoughts can bind us as much as they can free us.
Absolutely.
And I'm so proud and I'm so grateful that you're in a place now where you feel free, because I know all about that journey. This is the first Christmas, this past one that we just had, that I've not dreaded the holiday season, because I'd always put on weight. And I'd always feel awful, and I'd always feel like I needed to start the new year with a brand new diet. This is the first time ever where I haven't done that, because I've been able to let go of a very similar thought. My one was a little bit different, but basically the same wrong idea that how I look is tied into my value. Therefore, if I look a certain way, I will not be seen as valuable. Which is rubbish.
Yeah, absolute rubbish.
But it's something that we all believe in some capacity or another. So just to wrap up this conversation, Jack, for that person who's listening in right now and they are on the same journey as you, or the journey that you were on a few years ago, where there was a particular thought that was stripping them of a lot of joy and freedom, what would be your thought or your encouragement for them?
become aware of it. Actually dive into it, because a lot of the time I think we can be quite fearful of those thoughts that try to expose our thoughts.
Yeah.
So let it gently just come in and become aware of it, become really conscious of it, start investigating it even, start looking at alternative ways of thinking. Just as that thought can bind, you can let the thought in that's going to free you as well.
Today, I want to focus on how we think about our bodies. Now, this may be a vulnerable and tough topic for you, and I promise I know all about how unhealthy internal body image dialogue is linked to childhood experiences and trauma, and maybe one of these episodes later I'll share more about my journey. But today, could you do one of these 3 gentle things? Number 1, could you play out some worship music and declare Psalm 139, which is all about God reminding you how fearfully and wonderfully you are made? Number 2, could you write down some of the negative thoughts you have about yourself and then be curious and ask yourself how these thoughts could be shaping your life? The key here, though, is to not be critical. Simply hold those thoughts loosely and be curious. Lastly, maybe for you, you know that you need to change the way that you think about something. Maybe it's been holding you back. Maybe it's been stopping you from living the life God has destined you to live. And if that's you, would you today consider reaching out to a trusted friend, family member, or even a professional to help you break free from thoughts that are binding you? Whatever you choose to decide to do today, I hope you can walk away knowing that your thoughts can bind you, but they can also free you. And that is the beauty of God's word. I hope today you can choose to be curious, to let God in, and focus on the joy. Proverbs 4:23, be careful how you think. Your life is shaped by your thoughts. Well, that wraps up today's conversation. I cannot wait for tomorrow. Catch up then.